What's going on, guys? Aarava here, and welcome to Let's Talk F1 2015 for the Singapore Grand Prix today. This is part of a year-long series where I do some aerodynamic analysis on the race weekend, usually on Friday, but for the last 3 races, I've been doing them after the race because it seems like you guys really enjoy the fact that you can talk about the race then after in the comments below. So let's do that again. Let's turn the comments into a little forum and talk about the race as well as just the aerodynamics and whatnot, which I'll get to at the end of the video. But first, let's actually just talk about the race. What a hectic one, and obviously I know I've been told the BBC is actually running this later on in the day, so if you haven't watched the race yet, then this is your warning. This is going to spoil the race for you, so if you haven't seen it yet, click off the video. You can come back to the video after you've watched it on BBC or whatnot, and you can comment below your thoughts. But I've watched it on Sky just now. The race just ended, the podium was just done, and wow, what a hectic race. It wasn't actually anything that thrilling in terms of the actual action we saw. There was a few really nice overtakes here and there by Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen having some awesome racing done. But in terms of the overall actual amount of action, there wasn't too much on-track overtakes, but the amount of hectic stuff that happened this race, and, we'll get all into it. Just so much, like, actual action to keep up on that front in terms of crashes happening, safety cars. We had 2 safety cars in the race, which is pretty mad. There's been a 100% record of safety cars at Singapore, but this has been 2. There's 2. They're just for 2 for good measure. Double dose of safety cars, which really did throw a few spanners in the works, but after all that, it really was no use. Sebastian Vettel came through to win the Grand Prix from pole position, and what just a stellar drive from him. Such a dominant race, really. Led from start to finish, I think it was. At least I think that's what they're saying. At least it looked like that way from the TV feed, because, he was just so in control. From the race start, he completely bolted. Like, he got 3 seconds within like 2 laps or something like that. Crazy pace from Sebastian. And then I think Ricciardo summed up on the podium quite well. He learnt that in the first stint, before the safety car came out, it was quite a good blessing for him. His tyres were starting to drop off. Ricciardo was starting to catch him. So after the race restart off that first safety car, Vettel sort of learned from it. He sort of went a little bit slower pace. It maybe looked like he was trying to back Ricciardo up into Kimi Raikkonen, so Raikkonen could maybe get second and they could get a 1-2 for Ferrari. But it could have also just been him trying to drag out the tyres long, because he did drag them out pretty well. He was still on the super softs compared to the Mercedes, who did a contra strategy, and they both went onto the prime tyres. And it sort of might have worked for them, but really in the end it was actually no use. Rosberg came home in 4th place with not too much pace, to be honest. I mean, his fastest lap was slower than both the Ferraris and the Red Bulls. At least, let's see here. He was 7/10 slower, just about slower than Kimi Raikkonen, and nearly pretty much, if you round it up, a second slower than Vettel and Ricciardo today on fastest laps. Ricciardo getting the fastest lap just about from Vettel. So in terms of that contra strategy, it didn't really work for the Rosberg at least today. And for Hamilton, well, things went even worse for him if you haven't seen it already. Obviously, Hamilton had a huge issues, and he ended up DNFing from the race. He eventually retired, having some throttle issues, saying that when he pressed the throttle pedal, there was basically no juice coming out of the car, and for some reason, they couldn't pick it up on telemetry, so they didn't really know what was going on. And to save the engine, just to kind of, they were already pretty much getting overtaken by everyone. They were getting overtaken by a Manor car, so pretty much it was kind of time to kind of end the race for them, just to save the engine and whatnot, because I believe they're saying they have to use that same engine in Suzuka, so they want to try and keep that. But Hamilton, a DNF, which means in the championship, well, he's still got quite a really awesome healthy lead, to be honest, so really it's no real big harm to Hamilton, but it is quite big for Sebastian and Rosberg catching up in terms of, they're closing up. Sebastian is only a few points behind Rosberg now, and that is just very, very tasty to see. And also, in terms of just mental mindset, obviously, there's a bit of a mental game going on right now at this part of the season. But to be honest, I think when we come to Suzuka next time, I think it will pretty much be another case of Mercedes dominating. Because the real big thing of why Mercedes was so slow this weekend, I think it was just a big factor of the tyres not working so well for them. And also the track itself will be more inclined to work well for the cars like Red Bull. Also Ferrari, surprisingly, looks like they have a very solid chassis. But more so, they're able to really work with their tyres and lean on the tyres. As Riva Bene said in the post-interview, he said Vettel was able to just lean on the tyres more than their competitors, and I think that's what kind of won him the pole, won him the race today. It seemed like Mercedes' issues were kind of together with the tyres. You know, both Hamilton and Rosberg were able to push on either set of tyres in qualifying and in the race. So it looks like, you know, some people are saying that might be to do with the pressures and having to crack down on the pressures, but it just might be the actual those tyre compounds. Because if you think about it, Mercedes have actually never, you know, worked too well on super soft and soft. That combination just doesn't seem to work well for Mercedes. And also their suspension, the way the chassis is set up, it just doesn't look like they can ride all those big curbs too well and shut the car in. They're more about a balanced kind of normal purpose-built circuit than Mercedes car. It just looked like they didn't have confidence in the car themselves today. Then there was also talk about apparently Ferrari's upgrades from last time out. Apparently they've gained and kind of matched, apparently. Just don't take my word for it. It's all apparently rumour that Ferrari have sort of matched on horsepower the Mercedes car. I don't think that's quite true, but I think here at Singapore it kind of showed that they did have some sort of upgraded engine power, because obviously at Singapore there's not many straights. It's more about squirting the throttle, squirting out the power. It's not about the kind of end game at the end of the straight line speed, where the Mercedes still probably has it over its competitors. So I think the kind of the power kind of generation from the engine probably has been upgraded a little bit by Ferrari, and that showed today here at Singapore. In terms of behind them, Valtteri Bottas came in 5th place, Danica Fiat in 6th, Sergio Perez in 7th, Max Verstappen in 8th, Carlos Sainz in 9th, and Felipe Nasr rounds out the points in 10th place. Awesome show from Max Verstappen today. He was one lap down at one point, and he came through for 8th place. I know there was a safety car, but still, it counts. One lap down, and he got 8th, and at one point it was last, because, you know, even if there was a safety car, he unlapped himself and he had to start last. So last to 8th, really, really impressive stuff from Max Verstappen. At the end, also, his team told him to let Sainz through, and I believe it was because Sainz let Verstappen through earlier on in the race to let himself, you know, get up the field and unlap himself, and then this was sort of like a, he let you out, he let you through before, so you have to do the same favour now at the end of the race. But I'm glad he stood his ground, because it's very different. That's a very different scenario when you're letting your teammate through to unlap himself. At that point, he's got nowhere to go. You might as well let him through. He's not really spoiling your race too much. He's trying to unlap himself. But this was for solid points and just solid pride at the end of the day, and I don't think Max was very right to not let him through. You know, he screamed down the radio like, no, back at the team, and I was very happy he did that, because, you know, it doesn't matter that, oh, he let him through at the beginning. It's a very different scenario. That was just, you know, letting him through because he was unlapping himself. This was, you know, he's done a brilliant drive to come all the way back to overtake Sainz in the end, and then why would he, you know, let him through? It just didn't make sense to me why Toro Rosso would do that. But good that Max stood his ground. Perez also made a very, very nice move in the middle of the race, and he had just a generally solid race compared to his teammate, with obviously crashed out with Massa, and I believe it was a 3-place penalty for Japan, sorry. So Hulkenberg gets a penalty there. It was a very odd kind of incident. Hulkenberg coming through, he said he saw Massa in his post-race interview, but then kind of continued on and just assumed that he would, you know, be slow out of the pits, but Massa just kind of literally steamrolled into him, and they sort of made a collision. But I think majority are saying that it was probably Hulkenberg's fault, and maybe it was, and also you got to say that's why the stewards obviously gave him a 3-place penalty. So for me, it was a little bit of a weird racing incident. Massa sort of could have slowed down for him. He was the one coming out the pits, so maybe you should be obliged to slow down a little bit, but also Hulkenberg could have maybe used a bit more of common sense and left a little bit more room on that second turn indeed. So a mixed bag today for Force India. Lotus, well, Pastor Maldonado 12th place and Grosjean in 13th, and Maldonado collided with my man Jenson Button, and that was a very sad end to the Grand Prix. Obviously, Button was in the points. Alonso was in the points at one point, but then Alonso's engine, or whatever it was, crapped out. I didn't really bother to really care too much about why it happened. I just cared that it happened. Alonso out, and then Button, he was in the points. Then he had a collision with Maldonado, which was sort of 50-50. I think he was getting a little bit frustrated with Maldonado, so he had to make a pit stop, and then his gearbox or something crashed. I don't even know. It doesn't even matter what on earth went wrong with his car. The fact is something went wrong, and it's another double DNF for McLaren, which was very, very upsetting for me to see. As many of you know, if you know me properly, you'll know I'm a McLaren, or more of just a Jenson Button fan, so I was very disappointed at that, but oh well, things go on, and I was just happy to see Vettel get first place. It's great to see a non-Mercedes win once more, the third one we've seen this season, and, you know, people are asking, is this going to turn into a really late miracle championship fight or something like that? I think, honestly, it's going to go back to the normal Formula Mercedes sort of race, Suzuka, but it's a nice thing to see this eventually come through, and, you know, this will obviously inevitably give Ferrari a really big boost, big morale boost to have such a season like this where they've won 3 races, and that will be great for them, you know, after the season's over to push on for 2016. So, yeah, just all in all, a very, very hectic race, very enjoyable. Obviously, I might have missed 1 or 2 things out from the race. There were 2 safety cars, I said that, but I might have missed some things out. Don't blame me too much. It was a very long race, a 2-hour race, so there's going to be things I've probably forgotten. So if there's anything you wanted me to talk about, maybe pop it in the comments if you thought there's something else I haven't mentioned that was worth mentioning. Raikkonen in 3rd place. He seemed pretty damn depressed on the podium, to be honest. Good old Kimi not really caring too much in the, you know, there was in the after press conference, I said on Twitter that Ricciardo and Vettel sort of were talking to each other like they were good schoolmates, and then Raikkonen was sort of the guy who was in the year above, who was just like, what the fuck are these kids on? Like, he just looks so depressed for some reason, but I guess that's just Kimi. But yeah, really, you know, fun race to watch. It was very hectic, a lot of banter on Twitter. My God, the Twitter on banter was on point, So if you guys aren't on Twitter and you don't follow me or some of the other guys on the F1 community, please go do so. You know, my Twitter handle's @_aarava. If you're not on Twitter, get on it for F1 banter, because it is just great. There's so much just activity on the timeline, just great. GIFs left, right, and centre about the race. Really awesome stuff. So, yeah, that's been the kind of little race review, I guess you could say, of the race. Little race recap and my little thoughts on it. But if you guys want to discuss it, obviously, as I said, let's use the comments as a good forum and let me know your thoughts. And it's really great to see the last 2 races, you guys have been going back and forth in the comments, talking to each other about the race. That's really great to see. As a little community, you guys are talking together. So finally, before I wrap out the video, obviously we usually do some aerodynamic talks. I know the last few episodes we've been doing less and less aero talks, and that's pretty much just because there hasn't actually been too much coverage. There's, you know, apart from the stuff on Twitter, the TV people and, you know, just general blogs don't cover it as much as, you know, they used to at the beginning of the season, so I've been able to read less about it. But there were some interesting upgrades. So talking about the winners, Ferrari had a very interesting update at the back of their car. Now you can see there is the kind of back end of the car. You can see where the exhaust pipe is. Now just below the exhaust pipe, you can see 2 black winglets sticking out of that crash structure where the rain light is. That kind of, it has a yellow piece on top and it kind of extends towards the exhaust. And you can see 2 little winglets popping out, hopefully. I'll circle it in red afterwards in Photoshop. So those winglets they've added in, and that's sort of to help the exhaust plume. So obviously the exhaust plume comes out and the winglets will help affect it. And that's just to kind of help the entire kind of section. You can see the monkey wing is there as well, and just helps the entire plume go upwards and kind of help connect the entire air over the rear wing. So just a little update there for Ferrari. In general, them and pretty much every single team basically whacked on all their high downforce wings. So we saw at Italy, they stripped back everything. This race, they put everything back on pretty much. We saw Mercedes also running a monkey seat for this one. Usually this season, Mercedes haven't actually run a monkey seat. They didn't even run it in Monaco, indeed. They didn't even run it in Monaco, which is quite a high downforce circuit, obviously. So they felt the need to run it. Usually it's used for getting more downforce at the rear because it helps the air to stay connected. But Mercedes haven't run it to try and get a bit more straight line speed. But here in Singapore, obviously, they were struggling a little bit, obviously, in practice, qualifying and the race, for actually getting the car moved around the circuit. So maybe they felt they needed that extra downforce at the back. So they used the monkey seat at the back, and quite a hefty one, actually. About 3-4 layers of monkey seat cascades there at the back of the Mercedes car. We saw Red Bull really, really good throughout the race. Obviously, the chassis working a treat, and it was very apparent in qualifying throughout the race that look at the rake, they're actually, the angle of the rake of their car that they're actually using. If you don't know what that means, basically that's just the tilt of the car that actually stands on the tyres. You can see it from this picture quite clearly. If you look towards the rear tyre on the left-hand side, you can see the floor is quite elevated, and it starts to slant down towards the front of the car. And you can see the front is very, very low. This is something they've done since, you know, 2010. They've always ran their car very high-angle rake, you know, very high at the back and very short at the front. It really gets the front wing as closest to the ground as possible to connect the air, to get all the air flowing through that front wing, and obviously that all connects back to the back of the car. But it was very, very much apparent in qualifying, and it was really nice and aggressive to see from Red Bull. Obviously, they kept on with all their really aggressive front wings. They brought back all the cascades they sort of took off from Italy, and just a nice back-end shot of the Red Bull here. Very, very nice, very neat and tidy, and just showing that the chassis is still very solid in the Red Bull. So really, it is actually just the engine that is hindering their performance, because the chassis is still very, very solid. So here at Singapore, you know, if they had, you know, they were saying in the race, maybe if they had a Ferrari engine, they could have maybe fought Sebastian, maybe Ricciardo could have got them, but we never know, truly. But, you know, it does show, you know, Red Bull, if they did get a good engine this season, they'd still be very much up there. It really is actually just the engine that's really faulting them today. Moving on to Sauber. Sauber debuted a new nose, not too different. They've just really shortened up the actual kind of sticky, pointy out bit that comes from the front of their nose. It looks a lot like the McLaren nose if you look at it closely. It looks very much like the McLaren nose. So they kind of just shortened it up from what it was before, just kind of getting that kind of more airflow through because there's less kind of bodywork blocking all the air going through that middle part that gets to all the splitters underneath the car. And they've also been still continuing on with their little flap on the end of the end plate that they've kind of on and off been debuting since China, but this time they definitely ran it during the race. And finally, going on to Toro Rosso, I thought this was probably one of the more interesting kind of updates to Toro Rosso because it was so apparent how much extra downforce they're trying to put on from the front wing. So this is their old front wing, and now we move on to their new front wing, and you can see the huge difference in just the cascade size and the extra cascade, the kind of wisp they've got from the main cascade they've got. It looks so look, if we look back at the old one, just look how dramatic of a change that is. It just looks very, very apparent. There's no way, you can't really get away from it, of how much they're trying to affect that front wing from. So I thought that was a very nice, interesting picture to look at. And finally, we saw McLaren running their little streaks on the rear wing once more. They've been running them on and off this season, usually, obviously, at the higher downforce circuits. They debuted it all the way back in 2014 in Germany and have been running it since. So these little kind of slitted fins that kind of help all the air channel upwards to get that upwash from the rear wing, which makes the net downforce. So those are a few aero bits. Obviously, not too many. Some of you have been pointing out there haven't been too many aero updates that I've been talking about in the videos, but that's just been a case of, one, I have been quite busy lately, so I haven't actually myself been able to keep up with the Aero updates myself as a fan, just reading about it. And also just generally seems I'm not seeing too many amazingly major updates being put on my timeline and whatnot to read about, or even worth really mentioning too much. Otherwise, I'll just be waffling on. So, yeah, that has been Let's Talk Singapore. Bit of a longer video, but I hope that's not too bad, and I hope you guys have stuck around for that. If you have enjoyed the video, then do be sure to smash that like button. Again, let me know what you thought about the Grand Prix in the comments below. Do you think we'll get to see the same sort of thing in Suzuka, or do you agree with me? It will just be back to Formula Mercedes pretty much from Japan. But yeah, let me know all that good stuff below. If you're new around here, then do subscribe for more weekly Formula 1 content and other motorsport racing video game content. But I've been aarava. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you guys next time.